We actually have a plan. It's called CERP, Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan, adopted by Congress, I think almost unanimously. I think only one person voted against it back when they all spoke to each other there. And they all vacationed in Florida, and that, I think, was part of the reason they wanted to save the Everglades. But CERP involves a whole bunch of things, and what they've done is taken a huge hydrological model that takes a little 2 mile by 2 mile squares of the entire state of Florida from Orlando down, and they've shown every canal and everything, and I've come, I don't do computers that well, so that you can poke it here and see what will happen over here. Poke it here and see what will happen over here. And they spent 10 years with the Governor's Commission, which I happened to sit on in the 90s, working out various iterations of how we might fix it. And there are a bunch of components. I think there are 50 components in all. But the major components are, there will be some storage north of the lake. We are going to finish rewinding the Kissimmee River. We've rewound most of the oxbows from the old canal. And we went from having destroyed the largest eagle rookery in the continuous states to eagles gone to back to having the largest eagle rookery in the state. If you want to see something that's rather fun, go to the Fish and Wildlife site and look up eagles. They will show you the nesting eagles in Martin County. This huge bunch of nesting eagles in the rewound Kissimmee River. So we need to rewind the Kissimmee. We need to put some reservoirs up there, but putting a whole bunch of reservoirs up there is not going to solve our problem. And it's not going to send any water to Everglades National Park or the Biscayne Aquifer or Florida Bay. There's also a reservoir in Martin County. That reservoir in Martin County is not meant to take Lake Okeechobee water when they dump Lake Okeechobee. It's meant to take the water from Martin County farms, put it in the reservoir, and reuse it on those farms, or to bleed it down slowly instead of all at once. There's a similar reservoir over on the Caloosahatchee. And it also includes the fact, one of the things we done to ourselves is build a Tamiami Trail, which is a dam across the River of Grass. And if anybody's been on the trail recently, there's one beautiful 1 mile bridge, and they're working away on the 2 mile bridge to let the water flow again, because the culverts weren't enough along the trail, and they were blocking the flow again. We have a whole bundle of projects that they nicknamed SEP, Central Everglades Plan, that are going to take the dikes out, fill the canals in below the agricultural area, and make the northern Everglades part that's north of the Tamiami Trail and south of the ag area back into a natural, free-flowing Everglades again. But they're still missing the key piece. And you've got to realize that this is in my lap. I'm going to stop and get it out of my lap so I won't wave my hands at it. Here. And our problem right now is that the key piece is known as the EAA Reservoir. It's not just a reservoir. It is a system of cleaning up the water, storing the water south of the lake, and moving it south. It's the key piece, being able to move a whole lot of water south. And what we've got now in the lake is a whole lot of water. Not to move it all at once in spurts and starts, but to move it in a continuing system of flow. So the simple way to look at it is right now that sugarcane field is pumping water in, pumping water out, and every drop that pumps out needs to be cleaned up by an expensive STA. If we have a reservoir of 30 or 40 or 50,000 acres, I won't even argue about the amount, in the EAA, they can pump their dirty water into the reservoir. And then they can pump their dirty water next week when it hasn't rained back on their field. And they don't have to treat it. They're just putting back the dirty water where the dirty water came from. What they're doing then is two really important things. And you can only quantify them in a hydrological model. You can't say, I need so many acres for this or so many acres for that. But they're freeing up stormwater treatment areas, so there's more capacity. And they are lowering the lake level because they've got some storage in this reservoir from the water they're reusing. And so now I can take lake water and have the capacity in the stormwater areas to flow that lake water south, where they need the lake water to go south. It's a system. It's not a reservoir. I got very frustrated when somebody who should have known better on the board of the Water Management District said, well, that's not big enough to hold all the water from the lake. Well, no, it's not supposed to hold all the water from the lake. It's supposed to be a system of really making a much more efficient system you have now, so you don't have to treat every drop of water, and you don't have to treat keep the lake too full. One of the things that needs to be part of that system is the fact that we will reserve water for the natural system. That's a technical language they use, but it means if I lower the lake level, let's just pretend for a foot, instead of keeping it at 15.5, instead of keeping it at 13.5 in the summer, I let it, keep it at 12.5. Then I've got a lot more room for what's happening to us right now. But if I free up lake capacity, and then I say I need to store more water, because somebody wants some more water, I'm going to be back in the old cycle I had before. So there are a number of things they need to do that. Well, everything was going fine until we got to this last piece. And then we got to the problem that first Sugar said, well, not now. Not now. You don't want to talk about that reservoir now. If you talk about that reservoir now, you might never be able to get anything else done at all. Not now. Later. By the time we got to last year, Sugar dug its heels in and it said, not ever. You may have seen some pieces of some of wildly expensive lobbying and advertising. They said the coastal elite in Martin County were trying to destroy the farm workers. I'm not sure why you coastal elite were wanting to pick on farm workers. But they have whole full-page ads all over the place saying the coastal elite were simply trying to destroy farm workers. They said that that blue-green algae, that green slime that's all over our estuary, never mind the pictures Jackie Thurlow took showing it coming down the canal. That all came from your septic tank. They said that we were hysterical, and it really wasn't a problem at all. They said all kinds of things like that. They also said that most of the water comes from the north of the lake, and therefore that's where you should build all the reservoirs. It misses the idea of a system that works. It misses a way to move water south. If you can't move water south, you can't solve this problem. We need some reservoirs north of the lake, but building all the reservoirs in the world north of the lake would not solve the problem for South Florida and the water it needs down there, and it wouldn't solve the problem for us. It wouldn't keep us from being dumped. So, the other one was, well, we can't possibly finish our present projects if we thought about buying land in the EAA. And I keep saying, we can walk and chew gum. We've done it before. We can do 2 projects at once. If we don't go ahead and buy the land in the EAA now, even if we don't start that project for 10 years, then we're not going to start that project ever. If we don't move ahead now, CERP probably isn't going to happen. So into this very bleak picture with us environmentalists throwing rocks at Sugar and Sugar throwing rocks at us, and 2 of the biggest executives in Sugar having returned to Martin County because they like the fishing. Rides a white knight in shining armor on a charger named Senator Joe Negron. And Senator Negron took the time, listened to everybody, talked to the Corps, talked to the Everglades Foundation, talked to the Sugar people. He worked for a law firm that worked for the Sugar people. And he announced that we were going to buy the land and we were going to send the water south. And then he became president of the Senate, and he made it very clear that the Senate was not going home unless they did. He's only president of the Senate for 2 years. 1 year has passed. What Joe Negron pulled off last year didn't seem possible. There was a fury of Sugar advertising and Sugar lobbying. Almost every other state official came out against it. And about halfway through the legislative session, they all said, oh, it's okay. We found a piece of land. You won't have to buy any land, and you won't have to break any leases, and you won't have to take any sugar cane out of production, because you can use the A2 reservoir site. Well, that sounds very good. Does anybody in this room have any idea what the A2 reservoir site is? You don't want to know. Anyway, it's part of the set plan. Right now, it's being used as a flow basin. After we get to the EAA Reservoir part, it's planned to be used as a stormwater treatment area, so we'll have plenty of stormwater treatment areas to treat that water going south. Well, when they discovered that A2 would make a wonderful place for the reservoir, and how are you going to treat the water? And they said, it'll make a wonderful site for the reservoir. Anyway, you find out whether that's true or not by arguing, but by running the models. The Corps of Engineers, not the Corps. Yeah, the Corps and the Interior Department have both run the models. They tell me it won't work. You cannot put a reservoir on the A2 site and have enough water treatment. You're going to have to buy land. Negron's bill was written in such a way that they could pretend that the A2 site would work, but they had to do the modeling in a set time, and if it didn't work, they had to buy the land. The bill passed in May. Nothing much has happened. First, we can tell nothing has happened. But we have a brand new, rather earnest, head director of the Water Management District. Pete Antonacci was a large, arrogant director of the Water Management District. He said it was all our fault and has left us and gone back to Tallahassee. The new one actually knows a little something about water, lives in Palm City, and is trying to play nice. In a game with some really big bruisers around him telling him what to do. And he is preaching cooperation in all directions, but we haven't seen the results yet. And what's scary is this. When they finish the modeling, which takes probably 3 or 4 weeks of supercomputers entire 24 hours a day after you've already put all the data in the model and everything else. It still needs to be reviewed. It will be very strictly reviewed by the Interior Department and the Corps and probably the Everglades Foundation, and they're not going to be able to get away with saying, see, we proved the A2 reservoir site would work, if they haven't done an honest professional job. What I'm scared of is we will end up in a muddle too late. And I think that can be solved if Senator Negron were to have some oversight hearings so that he could report what the progress was, or if we can get the Water Management District to publish a timeline. This is when we're going to have our model of planning complete. This is when we're going to run the model. This is when we're going to have the answers. We don't have any of that yet. And so it's an odd time. It really is the future of Warren County. It really is. I'm not just chicken little. It really is the future of all of South Florida that I grew up in, not just here, not just our estuary. And it's a time that if it doesn't happen now, it's not going to happen. Because Joe Negron won't be president of the Senate after this legislative session. And if in this legislative session we don't get the land we need for that last key component of SERP, then the Corps of Engineers has publicly stated SERP won't work. So it's an odd time. You don't want to just sit here and hold your breath. On the other hand, it's a very bad time to be shouting from the rooftops and disturbing people if they're actually trying to do something right at this point. It would be nice if they would tell us. But it's an exciting and hopeful time in terms of what Joe pulled off with SB 10, the number and name of his Senate bill, with the hopes for the fact that we might be able to replumb this system so that it works for all of us. Thank you. Does anybody have any questions? If anybody would like to have a copy of this, it's being filmed. Will it be on the Bull Sugar site?
Yes, most likely.
You can probably
not right
get
away.
it on bullsugar.org. If anybody wants my email and wants a copy of the speech for friends, relatives, if anybody wants the speech made to anybody else who will sit and listen to it, we've got more people in Martin County who understand and care about this than most of the rest of the state. They're beginning to get more organized, and Bull Sugar has been very important in terms of getting the Keys guides and the guides over on the West Coast and the folks all around the state understanding. There's a really good gal county commissioner, Daniela down in Dade County, who has been really good in pointing out the problems they have with their aquifer down there. We're getting all more on the same page of understanding that we don't want one little favor here and one little favor here. We want a system that works. And it's something that I have, it's been a long lifetime losing and winning. Winning's much more fun. Losing can be extremely depressing. But you remember Sisyphus, he was the guy who pushed the rock up the hill and kept rolling down on his head. And I'd come home from certain meetings and I'd say to Jim, the rock rolled down on our head again. And then we'd roll it up. But I've seen often enough in my lifetime in the state of Florida the fact that we can get the rock up the other side of the hill. So I want to thank all of you who come out on a rainy night to find out more about it, to talk to your friends about it, keep talking about it, write letters to the editor, send Joe a note saying what a great job he's doing, asking when we'll know whether it's going to work or not. Do everything you can. It does make a difference. And I'm going to hang around a while afterwards. If you have questions you didn't want to shout from the rooftops, I'll be here. Yes?
What kind of funding is there from the federal government and the state as far as buying this land for the reservoir?
Joe has the money.
He does?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And that's the piece that, along with the pressure to say we're actually going to identify it and buy it, having the money is the key. And he set that up in SB 10 on the last session of the legislature. Yes?
Are they buying that land from the sugar people? Are they the owners?
The sugar people are the people who own it. Now, whether they may be able to negotiate their way out of leases. One of the rather dumber things we've done over the last 20 years is to buy land from sugar and then lease it back to them in a sweetheart deal. There may be possibilities in that. One of the advantages we have, the state owns some deep muck. The closer you are to Lake Okeechobee and that sump of the old pond apple swamp, the deeper the muck is. And I went on a farm tour with the sugar people some years ago, and they can raise twice as much sugar in a year in the deep muck as they can in sandy soil. And so the state happens to own some deep muck, and we can trade that to them for twice as much land somewhere that doesn't grow sugar. We need some tough negotiation and some determination to do it. And I continue to be surprised at sugar. This is not a plan to destroy sugar. This is a plan for peaceful coexistence. This is a plan that doesn't say, let's kill the sugar subsidy, let's throw them out. It probably would have been cheaper to buy the entire 600,000 acres at fair market value and simply ask them to leave. But they're making a lot of money in sugar right now. They were afraid that NAFTA was going to give them competition from Mexico. It turned out not to happen, and they are doing very well. And I don't understand why they wouldn't cooperate, particularly as hard as Joe worked with them, in something that out of hundreds of thousands of acres is only going to take maybe 40,000 more acres out of production. I just don't understand. Somehow something happens to you when you get into a large lobbying machine and you begin to believe your own determination. And when you have the power to stop something, you stop it. If I was head of sugar now, even if I weren't an environmentalist, I'd make a deal with Joe Negron. Any other questions? I will be sitting up here for anybody who has any others.
I'm wired so you don't trip. Well, thank you all for coming out on this dreary evening for an exciting topic. I'm Carolyn Smith. I'm the manager here at the Cummings Library in Palm City. And we are so excited to be part of Robert Farley's Living History series. There's a preponderance of paper on that back table, but at one end, I should have one in my hand, there is a Martin County Library System event comment form. And if you like programs like this at the library, please fill one out, take it home with you, drop it off at any other library. But we need to hear from you so that we can continue to have diverse programming. So delighted to have Maggie here. I'm going to turn the program over to Robert Farley.
Hi, thank you for coming out on such a rainy day. I'm just going to announce if you want more programs like this, I have a Living History series schedule on the back table. This is the 7th event of this student semester. There's 30 in all, so we're right still in the beginning of it. So Maggie's presentation is number 7. Tomorrow I have something at the college. Jonathan Karp, a freshly minted lawyer right out of law school last year, he's going to talk about law school. So if you know anybody who's interested in law school and how to work financing or the debts that you incur through student loans, he'll tell you all about it. On Saturday at the Moorgate Library on the IRSC campus, we have Barbara Spalding, who's going to demonstrate sound healing. And I actually participated once, and I swear it's better than a massage, and she never touches you. And it's all about sound, and it alleviates stress in all of our lives. So if you're interested in programs like this, visit me on the sitting in the back. We have plenty of materials there that you can pick up and take home and see what's scheduled in the future. Without further ado, I do not have to introduce Maggy Hurchalla. She was county commissioner for decades. She's a top-notch environmentalist, and of course we have a couple of environmental issues here that was really tops on the 2016 local elections. You know, the Indian River Lagoon problems that we had, and all aboard Florida. So maybe that would be part of your program, but whatever, it's kind of freewheeling. So without further ado, welcome Maggy Hurchalla.
It's a perfect night to talk about rain and water. I am 76 years old. I was born in Miami. I've been in Martin County since 1968, and I've recently discovered that I'm living history. If you last long enough, you remember more. We've always been particularly proud of ourselves in Martin County for keeping this a special place. And that's because people like you come out and listen and care and are part of our comprehensive plan and everything else. But right now, the future of Martin County environmentally, and because Martin County's environment is so important to all of us, I think the future of all of us rests not in our hands. You may have heard on the way over that they're dumping the lake, and they will be dumping the lake for the foreseeable future. They had to stop a little bit because when the fall high tides come with the full moon, if you're dumping the lake, you will drown the people off State Road 76 on the South Fork. So they're trying to balance things out right now. But our future right now rests with the future of the Everglades. What happens to South Florida, what happens to the greater Everglades system is going to determine what happens to the St. Lucie River. And there's so much St. Lucie River that winds around so much of this county, along with the Indian River, that it really does affect all of us. It depends on what happens to the greater Everglades ecosystem. And the greater Everglades ecosystem is not just the sawgrass you see when you're going down the Tamiami Trail or Alligator Alley. The greater Everglades ecosystem goes all the way from Orlando and Disney down through the Florida Keys. All of that is connected water-wise. Push it in one place, something happens in another place. SIRP is the only acronym I'm going to wave at you from time to time. Most folks in Martin County have heard it by now. It's the Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan. It's a $1 billion joint effort between the Corps of Engineers and the state of Florida to get the water right. It's a 50-50 partnership, dollar-wise, between Florida and the federal government. And if the comprehensive restoration doesn't happen, our estuary is going to die. If the restoration doesn't happen, a lot of other things in South Florida are going to be in as bad trouble as we are. We're kind of the mouse that roars here. Martin County residents have made more noise about the problems that need to be solved than a lot of the other people who are going to be hurt worse. But you all have been more knowledgeable about it. The Corps of Engineers says on there's a component of the SIRP plan that applies to Martin County, of the Indian River Lagoon South Plan. And in the beginning of that plan, the Corps of Engineers, the state engineers of the Corps of Engineers say, if the water management system for the state of Florida is not, and for Martin County and the St. Lucie is not changed, then the estuary will be irrevocably destroyed. That's the Corps of Engineers. That's pretty strong language. In understanding why we need SIRP, we need to understand what we've done to Florida's natural systems. Over the past 100 years, when we were trying to civilize a very swampy state, and I'm going to run down the state, and I'm not going to give you bunches of acronyms and names and canal things and pictures and overheads. We're going to start at the Kissimmee River. The Kissimmee River winds down from Orlando in a really wide floodplain, miles and miles wide, and connects up above Orlando all the way down to Lake Okeechobee. I'm not going to do it chronologically, but I'm going to tell you the things we did and how they changed the natural system and what we need to do within the constraints we have to put it back so it works for us. Not so it just works for the critters, but so that it works for us. 100 years ago, we wanted to get rid of all the water in the state of Florida. If you look at some old maps that show the wet areas, there's a whole lot more wet Florida than there was dry Florida 100 years ago. And the idea was you could never get rid of enough water. And in the early 1900s, they started doing that. And then by 1960, the Everglades were on fire. It was heavy muck that was akin to peat fuel, and it wouldn't stop burning when it got dry. At that point, we tried to store all the water we could because we decided we'd thrown away too much water. Florida rainfall doesn't do averages. Look at it. We have 55 inches a year of rain, theoretically. But we do extremes more than we do 55 inches. And those extremes run from 30 inches in a year to over 100 inches in a year. And they are the normal. The 55 is not the one that happens most often. It's the one that averages the two extremes. And those extremes are unpredictable. We go from drought to flood. You know, don't blame your water managers. One day they can be telling you, you really need to save water, we're in a terrible drought right now, and 2 weeks later you could be flooded. Sometimes just a week later. Since June, Lake Okeechobee levels have risen 5.5 feet. In the last 30 days, Lake Okeechobee levels have risen more than 3 feet. It's very difficult to predict. You can predict that it mostly rains in the rainy season and it's mostly dry in the dry season. But sometimes it rains an awful lot in the dry season. You get a northeaster coming down and a warm front hits a cold front and it rains and rains and rains. And sometimes it doesn't rain at all in the summer season. Sometimes you're having a dry summer and then you get Jose and Irma and Maria and we'll hit it for the panhandle, I understand. So we have these wild gyrations in how much it rains, and we don't know ahead of time how it's going to happen. If you fill up a reservoir and say, there, we did it, we filled that reservoir up and all that rain's not going out, and then some more rain comes, what happens next? At this point, Lake Okeechobee will be 17 feet tomorrow. That's a dangerous level for Lake Okeechobee. What happens if we get a hurricane? It's a really difficult job to be a water manager in Florida, but when we started out doing this, it was first drain the swamp, and then it was first save the water, and then the next thought was, well, let's do our engineering from our averages, sort of thing. And we didn't have the capability then, in terms of the computer hydrological models, to set up the entire state of Florida's water system and say, you know, if I poke it here, this is going to happen over there. Since the 1990s, we have had that capability, and whether we're going to make use of it or not is the real challenge. But starting at the top of the system, what did we do? Well, the first, or actually the last really terrible bad decision we made, because we kind of stopped draining the swamp and digging canals a while back, but by 1960, we should have known better, but we straightened the Kissimmee River. The Kissimmee River went like this. It was a wiggly river of oxbows that took 100 miles to go the same distance a bird could fly in 50 miles. But Orlando was booming, and if we took that river, straightened it out, and put a big ditch right down the middle of it, we could get the water off Orlando very quickly. The result was we got more dirty water to Lake Okeechobee much faster. The beautiful part about the natural system was, in a really rainy year in the Kissimmee floodplain, which is something like 2.5 million acres of places that's been rained on just as much as we have in the last day or so, and is now flowing off to somewhere, that spread out. It spread out in shallow pools that were kind of warm, and it evaporated. So in the time that it didn't need rain, it evaporated a lot because it spread out and it evaporated off. Well, when you put it in a ditch, that doesn't happen anymore. So we were getting more dirty water because our last big mistake was cutting the throat, literally, of the Kissimmee River. Back in the olden days, Lake Okeechobee didn't have a dike around it. It barely had what you would call a shoreline. If you've driven out on 441 out by the lake, you'll see that, you know, a little bit of rise where the big trees are is, 6 inches maybe, or a foot higher than what the lake level is. And the lake in the olden days didn't have a dike around it, didn't have a big berm or cliff around it, and when it rained hard, it just spread out all over the place. And then it would overflow to the south and go on down. Florida efforts to drain the swamp were pushed further along by that beautiful, rich muck they found south of Lake Okeechobee. Florida doesn't have very good soil. Anybody who comes from a farming state looks at our sand and our rock, and it's not your favorite place to farm. All my friends who are master gardeners simply build their garden above ground and don't bother with Florida soil. But that muck south of Lake Okeechobee is rich in all sorts of nutrients, and it looked like the perfect place to farm. And so they built a little dike to keep the lake from going south. And in 1926, less well known than 1928, the 1926 hurricane was the great hurricane in Miami. It did huge death and destruction there. The 1926 hurricane came up from Miami across the southwestern part of the lake, killed 200 people, left the small town on Palousahachie and the lake covered with corpses to the point that the Corps of Engineers moved in and closed the town. I think for 2 months. So they built the dike a little bit higher. And then in 1928, the great 1928 hurricane, which came in just past the Jupiter Lighthouse, broke the lenses in the top of the Jupiter Lighthouse, and hit Lake Okeechobee, sloshed the water up, sloshed the water back, and killed 2,000 people. So after that, they got serious, and they built the very big Herbert Hoover dike. And the very big Herbert Hoover dike is the one that we're working on fixing right now. And deeper water isn't part of the natural system. One of the things that happened when they caged the lake was that if they let the water get too deep, they drown the marshes. And if you drown the marshes are what are holding down the muck at the bottom. And when the muck gets stirred up, then you got more dirty water. Well, we used to have a lake that spread out. We used to have a lake that didn't have a dike. And now we have a lake that's got a dike around it. And we've got a safe place to farm south of Lake Okeechobee. And the water has to go somewhere. The St. Lucie estuary was never in any way, shape, or form connected to Lake Okeechobee, even by overflows. The Caloosahatchee River sometimes, at very high times, did overflow from Lake Okeechobee. It's a much bigger river. But if you look at a picture of our river, it goes up and it goes down, and that's it. You know, it doesn't go over to Lake Okeechobee. They built the St. Lucie Canal from the St. Lucie Inlet to Lake Okeechobee to get rid of the water that came down to the lake when it got too full, even for a very great big Herbert Hoover dike. And they likewise connected and canalized the Caloosahatchee River on the other side so they could dump even more water out on that side. And the result of having the Herbert Hoover dike there to make things safe south of the lake is the farming south of the lake expanded to over 600,000 acres that they call the Everglades agricultural area, which is hard to say, so we call it the EAA. And that started vegetables, tomatoes, way back in the 20s, and sugarcane. Now it's mostly all sugarcane. And one of the things I like to point out to people is it's not that the sugar industry is necessarily inherently evil, other than health techs or cavities. It's the fact that they're in the wrong place. They are in the place the water used to flow through. And this does give us a problem. Because even the big dike can't hold all the water from the lake. You know, think of it. You've got 2.5 million acres up in the, just in the Kissimmee, not the other tributaries to Lake Okeechobee from the north flowing in. And you've got 460,000 acres in Lake Okeechobee. So I was running around calculating, and I think that you get something like if you get 6 inches of rain, then you're going to have a 30-inch rise in Lake Okeechobee. So you continue to have this problem of too much water there. But they did connect it up, and they do dump on us, and they have been transferring the problem to us for a long time. I was interested to find that way back in 1933, a new, maybe Martin County Commission in the county that had only been invented in the 1920s, sent a resolution to Congress asking them to please stop killing our estuary. We have been sending resolutions ever since. Back then they paid absolutely no attention to us. They pay a little more attention to us right now. If this stops working, tell me and I'll pin it back because I knocked it down. Meanwhile, what you originally had just south of Lake Okeechobee was not the Sawgrass Everglades. What you had was a huge pond apple swamp. They describe it as a great mysterious place with big old gnarled trees where you couldn't see the sun down below the treetops at noon. And it was a sump. It was a low area where the lake overflowed, and then everything that had come down the Kissimmee and come from everywhere settled out. That built 8, 10, 15 feet of mud there. And then when it came out the other end of the custard apple, it was like it had been cleaned perfectly. It was down to 2 parts per billion. It was such clean water that it could create the Sawgrass Everglades, which then swept all the way down through Everglades National Park till you get to the mangrove down along Florida Bay. And somewhere before the channelization of the Kissimmee River in the 60s and the invention of the Comprehensive Everglades Plan in the 90s, we began to understand that we'd done it to ourselves. We were, that's an old Farley Mallet line, we were making more droughts, and we were making more floods. And we've done all these things to get rid of floods, and we've done all these things to get rid of droughts. And it wasn't until the 90s that we had the computer capability to look at the consequences of what we were doing. By the 60s, the hydrologists, even without computers, knew that we were making some very serious mistakes, but at that point they were unable to convince the politicians. By the 90s, it was becoming fairly clear that we needed to do something about it. We were killing Everglades National Park because it wasn't getting enough fresh water. We were killing Florida Bay. It was getting toxic algae blooms that destroyed the bonefish industry, which has not come back in the Florida Keys. I talked to a Keys guide who's part of the fishing guides for clean water, and she said, if people ask me to go bone fishing with me as a charter captain, I say, well, it's the spirit of the chase, you know. Not only that, and perhaps for those who, take a more short-sighted view of environmental issues in relation to people, you have 4 million people who are drinking water from the Biscayne Aquifer in Miami and Broward County. That's a porous limestone aquifer with the ocean on one side of it. If there is not enough fresh water on the other side of it, you're going to have salt in your wells. And by the 1960s, and at various drought periods afterwards, they were getting salt in their wells in the Biscayne Aquifer. I think one of the more frightening things I've seen in terms of some of the climate change predictions is that if we do not send more water south to back up the head of fresh water on the west side of Miami's aquifer, that there will be salt water north of the Tamiami Trail in 30 years. We can do it. We've got a plan to do it. We can't keep it back forever, but we can keep the Biscayne Aquifer, we can keep Everglades National Park, and we can keep Florida Bay so that the changes that happen there change at a rate that can adapt instead of a rate that leaves you with disaster. And we're killing the 2 coastal estuaries, ours and the one over on the Caloosahatchee side. In the late 70s, Lake Okeechobee went belly up with a blue-green algae bloom. We'd never heard of blue-green algae before. We didn't even know it wasn't an algae. It's actually a cyanobacteria. The whole lake was covered in it. Fish died, stunk to high head. That's the same blue-green algae that we saw in the estuary last summer and we saw in the estuary in 2013. It comes and goes depending on how the sediments get stirred up, how warm the water is, how much the sun shines, and we will unfortunately see it again. But that caught people's attention in terms of our water management system and trying to do something about it. Why are we at a crisis now? If they've been dumping on Martin County since 1933, why didn't they kill it earlier, our poor estuary? Ernie Lyons was writing fantastic columns about it when I got here in 1968 and even before then. And there are a number of reasons. One is the situation worse, or one of the questions, or is Martin County just full of a bunch of hysterical angry people, which we are told the legislature thinks? The answer is, it is getting worse. Every time you drain another swamp, you had more runoff to that too much dirty water that you were trying to find a place to put all at one time when it rained too much. And we are still draining some swamps in Florida, though we pretend that we're not. And also because until the federal lawsuit made them stop, sugarcane had traditionally back pumped the water from their fields into Lake Okeechobee. And again, it's not exactly their fault that that's extremely rich in nutrients. It's not because they put so much fertilizer in it, it's because there's so much nutrient in the muck. And so they had been back pumping and back pumping and back pumping until they had built a wonderful, god-awful layer of silt at the bottom of Lake Okeechobee, questionable stuff in it, when the Clean Water Act said they couldn't do that anymore. And so at that point, they started sending it south. They said, you wanted water down there, because by the 60s, the National Park had been asking for more water, so they gave them more water. They said, not that water. And so there was another lawsuit through the Clean Water Act, and a federal judge told them they couldn't send dirty water south. So since then, you, the people of Florida and the taxpayers of Florida, have been building STAs, stormwater treatment areas. I think that the governor has a plan in motion to build $80 million worth of STAs in the next 10 years to add to the ones you've already paid for, to clean up the runoff from sugarcane that goes south. And that's made the problem worse, because we're in a situation now where when they dumped on us in 1933, they didn't have the pumps to do all that pumping. They didn't have the development to put all of the dirty water in it. They hadn't expanded the agriculture that much and everything else. But now it's all there, and on a day like today, there's no place to put it from Lake Okeechobee but us and the Caloosahatchee River. And that's where it's going. And it is going at such a rate that if it was perfectly clean water, which it's not, it would kill all the seagrass, it would kill all the oysters, you would have fresh water a mile out to the Whistle Buoy in the Atlantic Ocean, and everything that couldn't swim away, that needed to live in brackish or salt water, would die. And that does happen when they dump it and keep dumping it for long enough time. That's just with clean water. With dirty water, that's a whole other grim speech about cyanobacteria, and the fact that the short story I can tell you on that is it sounds like the LSD dream of a rabid environmentalist in deep depression. Yes, the toxins from cyanobacteria do cause ALS, Parkinson's, and Alzheimer's. Yes, they have done the experimenting to this point where you can feed this stuff to a monkey, and that is what happens. It is no longer a theory. And that's the problem we're having with the warmer, dirtier water now. But we're still having a problem. We've been having a problem, and the problem is worse. And when they were designing this whole system, which they designed, or they just built, and then they designed, and then they redesigned. The big redesign came in after 1947. In 1947, we had 3 storms in a row. I was a 7-year-old kid in Miami. It was perfectly wonderful. I think we got out of school for 2 weeks. There was water all around. You could catch tadpoles. My parents didn't like this much, but the 4 of us had a wonderful time. That flooded all the way up to north of Lake Okeechobee, and they did the Central and South Florida flood control scheme to do more diking and more damming all up and down the system. And that system was designed around sugar, so that sugar is guaranteed that they will have all the water they need for irrigation in the dry season. And with that guarantee goes the fact that you have to keep more water in the lake in the dry season than in the wet season. Well, it doesn't take a hydrologist to know that, naturally speaking, lakes would be deeper in the wet season than in the dry season. Well, we're forced to do it backwards, because we have to keep that extra 2 feet of water there for sugar. And we keep it until June, because that's the beginning of hurricane season. And sugar is very jealous about letting any of it go anywhere else except to sit right there in the lake in case they might need it. But if it's a wet, dry season and they don't need it, then you have 2 feet of water on 460,000 acres that you need to get rid of very quickly. And that ends up being dumped on us. On the other end of the system, Sugar is guaranteed all the drainage they need, whenever they need it, and we are guaranteeing we will build them all the stormwater treatment they need to treat their drainage. What you have now in the EAA, the Everglades Agricultural Area, is a shallow dish. A lot of the muck has evaporated and blown away with the wind. And if you tried to recreate just a simple flowway now, it'd go down in the dish and stay there for a while before it flowed on. And it would drown the entire dish. But because of that, when a sugarcane field doesn't have rain for a week, there is no well water source there, there is no river there. Their only source of water is to pump water down from Lake Okeechobee. If it doesn't rain for a week, they have to pump water down. And then if it rains, they have no natural drainage. And they have to pump water out to the stormwater treatment areas. So we've got this whole system built on keeping the lake as deep as we possibly can in the dry season. Then dumping the lake so that the dike doesn't break and we don't have hurricane problems in the summertime. And guaranteeing Sugar they'll have all the water they need and all the drainage they need. Those guarantees were not done, viciously or wantonly. I mean, here was an industry, they wanted the water, they got the permits, and now they're saying, okay, you said I could have it, and the state water managers got a little loose in overcommitting their supply, so they've actually committed more than they have. But Sugar has first choice. First choice for drainage, first choice for water from the lake. And that leaves us with, this continuing problem that you'll see these big ads that say, oh, the water's coming from the north. Well, yes, the water is coming from the north into Lake Okeechobee right now. But the fact that we have to keep the lake up as full as possible to have enough water for Sugar is what means we can't handle the water from the north. The fact that Sugar is in the way of water flowing south is the reason we can't handle the water from the north. It's not just a matter of building a bunch of reservoirs up north and solving the problem up there. In addition to the problem that our discharges to the estuary are getting dirtier, larger, and more frequent, there's another really interesting thing I learned in some seminars on Everglades restoration. It's about resilience. That's what biologists call the ability to recover. And natural systems have the most amazing resilience. Mount St. Helens now has the largest elk herd in the Northwest. After being the most unbelievably blasted volcanic slope in the country, there is a resilience. But natural resilience, just like our own resilience, gets worn down. And what happens is it's like the punch drunk prize fight. One concussion too many, and he doesn't get off the floor ever again. And they are looking at natural systems like the St. Lucie estuary and various other places in Florida and saying, we are getting to the point we are losing our natural resilience. If you say, well, we dumped on you before, and look, hey, there were fish jumping in it next winter. You can't keep doing it and expect to be able to recover and to have any kind of sustainable system. Serpents evolves, that's the bleak news. The good news is we have a plan.